Welcome to Air and Space Forces Magazine. I'm Tobias Naegele, Editor-in-Chief. We're here at AFA's Warfare Symposium. I'm with Charles Galbreath from Mitchell Institute's Space Power Advantage Center of Excellence.
You got it. You got it. Space Power Advantage Center of Excellence. A twisted acronym.
MI-Space.
MI-Space. Yeah, I don't want to say MySpace. I think there might be some legacy company out there that might have
MI-Space.
MI-Space.
Charles, we're about halfway through the Warfare Symposium.
Yeah.
We heard yesterday from General Saltzman, CSO, Chief of Space Operations, and he kind of set the tone for where the Space Force is right now. Let's start there, and then I want you to kind of walk me through what you're hearing.
Yeah, great. So I think he made it very clear up front that his target audience when it comes to the Warfare Symposium is Guardians. Because we're here in Colorado, the home to so many Guardians, so many bases, so many missions, that for him to be able to get out of the Beltway and actually engage with Guardians directly and pass on his thinking, his leadership mindset of where he's taking the Space Force and why. And it came through loud and clear that the whole reason that the Space Force exists is to achieve space superiority. Just like every other service is supposed to achieve their domain superiority against a potential adversary, that's why the Space Force exists. And he outlined a series of initiatives that have been implemented over the past several years. Several, right? It's been around for 5 years.
The Space Force is 5 years old.
So several's a relative term. But things like Space Force generation, that model to provide a recurring, a regular pattern for I'm on operations, I'm doing advanced training, I'm resting and preparing to be on operations again. So that's critical. The officer training course to instill across all new officers the warfighting ethos, what it is to be a Guardian with specialties in operations, intelligence, and cyber, as well as awareness of acquisition. He talked about the tenets, the 6 truths that he rolled out last December. He highlighted on a couple about ensuring this advantage in space, the space superiority, and how Guardians were instrumental in that. He recognized that that is why the service exists, to achieve space superiority, and they've made a lot of great progress. But he acknowledged the fact that where they need to be in the future to contest the domain and prevail in a conflict over China, perhaps, that there's still work to be done. And he made a plea to all of the Guardians that he was talking to. I need your input. I need your advice. How can we be better, more effective, more efficient, more lethal at delivering a combat capability that delivers space superiority? So that was great to hear that speech. And if you haven't already watched it, I think it's going to be available online. So be sure to check that out.
So I think that a couple of things that I heard in that speech. One is that he really talked about space control, control of the domain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as kind of a defining idea of what is space superiority. Space, just saying we want to achieve space superiority and explaining what that is for a wider audience, I think there's a distinction there. And I think he was working on trying to define that.
Yeah, so there is a slight distinction, and throughout my career, we somewhat use space superiority and space control somewhat interchangeably. But if you think about space superiority as the state of having a dominant advantage over your adversary, you can use space as you wish, and the adversary can't use it as they wish. That's space superiority. You achieve that state through space control operations, offensive and defensive. And of course, all of that is enabled by space domain awareness, satellite command and control, launch. There's a whole series of activities that leads you and culminates in the ability to achieve that state of space superiority.
So a second element that I saw yesterday and have seen in previous speeches from General Saltzman is a thoughtful, intellectual argument. He is not going up there and giving a raucous emotional speech. He is walking up to the podium and reading a very carefully thought through set of concepts and initiatives. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is why this should be inspiring you.
Yeah, he's an incredible thought leader, for sure, and he's a strategic thinker, and he is conveying what can be somewhat complicated thoughts and concepts to as simply as possible to the Guardians, to the wider audience that's here at the Warfare Symposium. And it's important that he be very specific in his words because we are on the cusp of a transformation in the way we think about the space domain. For generations, we thought of it as an uncontested domain. We had a space superiority because we were using space on a level that no one else could. We had an asymmetric advantage. No one was really threatening that, and no one was even challenging it with their own space capabilities. So we had a space superiority kind of de facto. But where we are now, with increasing threats from China, as well as China developing their own capabilities to hold our fielded forces at risk, we need to achieve space superiority. But in order to do that, we need the weapon systems that allow us to contest the domain, offensive capabilities, defensive capabilities, to actually achieve space superiority. The old policies of space as a sanctuary, we're not going to put weapons there, that has to change. And I think we're on the cusp of that, recognizing that, and actually getting to the point where, as a nation, we're going to deploy weapons, whether they be terrestrial weapons or space-based weapons, to actually, no kidding, secure the space domain for our advantage.
Okay, so we talked quite a bit about what Salty had to say. What about the other Space Force leaders? What are you hearing? You led a couple of panels today. So what did you hear?
Yeah, so I actually led two panels today. The first was about how to leverage commercial more effectively, and it was with commercial leaders. And we started with, well, what's the definition of commercial space? I mean, you hear from Space Force leaders, well, we're going to leverage commercial. Commercial is accelerating at an incredible pace. That's true. It is. But what do we mean by commercial? And what we came up with during the panel was basically, if it is a capability, a service, a technology, a component even, that wasn't designed, developed, and built specifically to be a government customer, then it's a commercial capability.
But that means that a privately developed product that had the government in mind is not a commercial capability?
Well, if it's a privately developed capability, that's a commercial capability because they didn't have the government
have the government sponsorship.
Right,
okay.
right. And so it's really, what was the intended purpose for it initially? What's interesting about this is commercial can move a lot faster than the current acquisition process within the Department of Defense. It's not just a space issue, it's across the Department of Defense. So if they can accelerate the delivery of capabilities, of technologies, of services, then the Space Force and others need to be able to latch onto that and incorporate it. And so a lot of the discussion was, okay, how can the Space Force position itself to receive those? What changes do we need to make to the acquisition process, to the requirements process? It was really interesting when we talked about cybersecurity, for example, that a lot of people think that the military cybersecurity is on a whole other level because of the military fight. But when you think about the cybersecurity requirements on banking or some other types of transactions that are very high.
Just the
so how do we
extent of
leverage
doing
that?
commercial cloud computing, how much security has to be
Absolutely.
in there because of how much private data has to be protected.
Right. And so if you can protect that type of data, maybe you can protect, right? And so the ability to incorporate those technologies, particularly on the software side, really came through during that commercial discussion. This afternoon, I hosted a panel discussion on PNT at the crossroads. And so we had Colonel Menschner, who is
PNT being
position, navigation,
and timing.
Yep, thank you. Colonel Menschner, who is the Integrated Mission Delta Commander for PNT, Dr. Voss, who is doing the force design for PNT in the future, as well as Dr.
And this is like GPS future.
and then some. And
Right,
we also
'cause
had
that will be both resilient through whatever might come.
Right. And so the third panelist was Dr. Hebert from AFRL, Air Force Research Lab. And so we talked about the current capabilities. We talked about the threats. What would a day without GPS look like, and how, because it's so ingrained in everything we do in daily life. And so we talked about the threat and how we're applying a lot of different techniques to overcome those threats. So resilient GPS, adding more nodes, multiple signal types, multiple signal sources,
Multiple regimes,
orbital regimes as well. I mean, NTS-3, and please don't ask me to spell the acronym for NTS-3.
I won't.
But it is going to be launched on the next Vulcan launch vehicle. Once that's certified, it is the first government payload for that new launch vehicle, but it is going to GEO, and it's going to demonstrate a whole set of new technologies specifically for position navigation and timing. So that was a really interesting discussion, and what the takeaway from that across operations, acquisitions, technology development, and force design was PNT is not static. We are constantly evolving PNT capabilities to accommodate, to overcome the threats and to deliver warfighting capabilities on a regular basis. So it was very, very great to hear.
So I want to ask you one more question, and I think you've got something you wanted to talk about. So we'll get to that in a moment. Before we do, yesterday there was a panel about that was focused on launch.
Yes.
And the panel really went in the direction of infrastructure and not launch capability, which is not a surprise to you, having written a paper on this very subject. It is interesting to hear at the same time that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force is saying, hey, maybe we have too many bases. We have too much infrastructure. We have too much ramp space. And the fact is the Space Force does not have enough.
Well, I think from the panel discussion yesterday, it was pretty clear that there are only a few geographic locations around the world that are ideal for space launch. We currently occupy, Vandenberg Space Force Base for polar, Patrick Space Force Base for equatorial type launches. Those are prime real estate, and we're going to need to continue to protect those. But if there's opportunities to look at other launch sites, I mean, we do Wallops, we do Kodiak as well. There's also some inland opportunities where we might be able to expand the suborbital missions that are currently done into orbital missions later. There's also the talk of...
So when we say inland, where are we talking?
Well, so the New Mexico spaceport, the space complex out near Edwards as well. So those are potential options that people are considering. Maine is pursuing launch capability as well, the state of Maine. And of course, there are international spaceports as well. So how we can integrate all of that into a robust infrastructure, yes, there's challenges to overcome in terms of export control and commodities like the fuel, getting the payloads there, et cetera. There's things that have to be worked through. But the fact that those three industry leaders were talking about that, thinking about that, making recommendations, I think was really important.
Okay, so at the end of your panel, there was a significant presentation.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So for the first time, we were able to award the General Atomics United States Space Force Unit of the Year. I had been working with the Chief of Operations staff on the headquarters staff for over a year and a half. They're the ones that designed this trophy. They came up with the criteria. General Atomics, through their generosity, paid for the trophy, and this is a behemoth trophy. It was so great.
I walked with you when you carried it backstage, and you were out of breath when you got there.
Yeah. Well, it's the altitude, but it's like a 14-pound trophy. It is significant, and so the fact that we finally got it across the finish line was tremendous. And just to highlight, the 11th Space Warning Squadron, they're the recipients of this year's General Atomics Space Force Unit of the Year. They had an incredible year. They fielded new capabilities. They supported, no kidding, real-world missions, including missile warning for some of the attacks that we've talked about before, as well as the rescue and recovery of downed airmen, and just moving forward with the development of their personnel and the mindset to assure the delivery of unsurpassed space capabilities. So congratulations to the 11th Space Warning Squadron.
All right, so Charles Galbreath of MI Space, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Tobias. Thanks.